All right, folks. So here's a little summary on the Republic. Remember, we read these books in the Republic, and we read it actually for kind of two reasons, but ultimately it's under the auspices of understanding idealism. And we read book 1, book 2, book 6, book 7. And idealism, recall, is the belief, perspective, whatever you want to call it, that what is real is idea. In other words, that reality is not physical. And what that means in the Republic is that reality is what Plato calls form, or the in itself. And so our job in understanding idealism in this work is really to understand what we mean by form and the in itself, and how these are the highest level of reality, and how these form idea. That's what we're after. Okay, so see if we can make sense out of this. Book 1 basically sets up various definitions of justice, right? You get Cephalus, you get Polemarchus, and you get Thrasymachus. All right, and ultimately what we realize after book 1 is that none of these guys has a real true definition of justice, but rather they all understand justice themselves and in how it benefits them. In book 2, Socrates begins, remember we talked about the ring of Gyges and all that kind of stuff, and what we realize is that there is a difference between justice in the city of luxury and in the city, or the healthy city. And it turns out that there are different understandings of justice in just about everything else. What is necessary in the luxurious city is much different from what is necessary in a healthy city. And what we discover is that Cephalus, Polemarchus, and Thrasymachus, their definitions of justice are really about the luxurious city, because when we're given over to luxury, we care ultimately about me. Now, book 6 talked about the divided line. And we realized in book 6 that there are various levels of reality. If you recall, there's a little thing on page 173, a little chart, that basically talks about this: imagination, belief, thought, and understanding. I'm going to get myself some room here. And that these are the fourfold levels of reality. And this one, the understanding, is what we mean ultimately by form. Now, in book 7, where we get the cave metaphor, we have the same kind of distinction between the inside the cave and the outside the cave. So we have in and we have out. And inside the cave there are shadows, and there are the artifacts that are held up by the puppeteers, if you recall. And then when we leave the cave, we have the image of what I'm going to call T-I-I, thing in itself. And then ultimately, we have the thing in itself. So if you put books 6 and 7 together, essentially you get this little setup, where the thing in itself in book 7 is identical to the form and the understanding of book 6. The thought in book 6 is identical to the image of the thing in itself in book 7. The beliefs spoken of in the divided line are equivalent to the artifacts spoken of the cave, and the images in book 6 become the shadows in the cave wall. Now that's the barest bones sort of summary of all this stuff. Now let's see how it works and what he's trying to say. Essentially, we need to put all this together and sort of get some kind of sense of the whole and some kind of takeaway on this. And so let me try again to construct an image that will hopefully make sense out of the whole thing. Tripartite soul: reason, emotion, appetite. Divided line: level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. Doesn't exactly equate, but nevertheless. Think of it this way. Take Cephalus's definition of justice, C for Cephalus, as appetitive. Because if you recall, he thought of justice in terms of how it could get him into a good afterlife. So in other words, he's considering his pleasures. You could think of Polemarchus's definition as an emotional one, because he spoke of justice in terms of doing good to friends, harm to enemies. In other words, if he likes you, he'll be just. If he doesn't like you, he won't. Thriximachus, I think, could go kind of either way. He said, if you recall, justice is might makes right. So if what you want is appetite, then it could be an appetitive one. If what you want is simply power for power's sake, it could be an emotional one. So the problem with all this, of course, is, well, who's going to be just simply to be just? In other words, who's going to concern themselves about justice itself instead of justice as it serves my own emotions and appetites? And the question there is, the only person who can do that is the person who cares about things like forms. Persons who care about things like justice itself. Not an image of justice itself, but justice itself. They want to know the truth of things. They want to know the isness, if you think back to Parmenides, and they want the unchanging truth. Whereas people down here are far more interested in physical things and things which change. And so here, in the same way that fashions change constantly, so justice would change constantly. So at the end of the day, if you add all this stuff with idealism, the sort of overall point is, unless we train people to extricate themselves from a reliance on the physical world, i.e. the cave, and educate them such that they begin to see and strengthen their reason so that they can see things in themselves, they'll never see justice itself. And so if we want to have a republic that is free and good, we need people that care about truth in an unchanging way. And the only way to do that is to recognize that there is a form of things, that there is an in itself that exists only as idea. And these ideas are not going to get you paid. Getting paid is very much an understanding of the types of souls that are more motivated by things like emotion and appetite. So that's kind of when you put it all together. But it's a very difficult road, because you've got to try to convince people who are more interested in what they see that what is most true is completely invisible and beyond physical access. Hence, you have to convince them that ideas are more real than physical. That's sort of, if we put it all together, there's obviously a lot of sort of sub-themes, and there's more than one way, obviously, to interpret this stuff, right? Far be it from me, I would be a puppeteer were I to say, this is the Republic, and you should listen to me. But this is a perspective, and it's one that kind of works well within the confines of our course, to, kind of make a point. But anyway, that's hopefully, a couple of the themes that I was hoping you would pull out of this, after struggling through all the readings. And if you did, outstanding. Anyway, there we have it. So what is next? Aristotle.